Hello and welcome to the Color Mentor podcast. My name is Paul Hanrahan. I'm a colorist, originally from South Africa. Now I'm based in Taiwan. On this podcast, I'm going to be talking to people who have mentored and inspired me on my color grading journey over the years. So welcome to the show. If you'd like to learn more about color grading, you can head over to my Patreon. It's called Color Mentor at patreon.com, and it includes test footage, color charts, basic skill training, all the way up to full coursework on various topics. I also offer one-on-one mentoring for those who want to refine their craft further. But without further ado, let's get on with the show. On this episode, I must just apologize in advance for having way too much fun. My guest is Jason Iversen. He's a visual effects technical supervisor. He's worked at Digital Domain, Rythm and Hues, and now at Weta in New Zealand. We were high school friends and we worked together a long time ago in South Africa. He was the co-founder of the Odd Force chat forum for Houdini and other software packages. And literally he's worked on more blockbuster films than I've had block noses. We talk about visual effects, color pipelines, and rendering techniques through the ages, and discuss where things are heading with the merger between Weta and Unity Games. Hope you enjoy it. Shit, man. So long since we've actually had a proper talk.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
It's been quite a while.
So what the hell is going on in rainy Wellington?
Well, it's springtime, and springtime's usually associated with things getting better, warmer, but spring is just chaotic. Like every day is, might start off sunny and end up like a howling horizontal rainstorm. And then the next day sunny again. It's just, it's chaotic. There's no planning anything in spring. They optimistically open up the sailing clubs, just over the hill here. And nobody can sail because it's just like every day it's like, no, you don't want to go out. No,
danger. But it's because you got no big mountains to hide behind. It's just you get whatever the fuck's blowing across the southern part of the globe, right?
Yeah, there's these ridges right here. Wind channels down that strait, usually in the northerly wind. But sometimes it turns around and the temperature drops by 10 degrees.
Jesus.
And it howls. And that'll just happen in an afternoon. You'll be like in a t-shirt. I've been caught many a time. I'm kind of used to it now.
Jeez, well, I can't wait to come and visit you.
Man, you got to get here.
I want to see all that Lord of the Rings memorabilia lying around.
Yeah. Literally down the street. I could probably with a good arm on a good Tuesday, I could probably hit it with a rock. But it sells all the elven swords. It's the Weta Workshop store. It's kind of the tourist-facing component of Weta Workshop.
It's like such a weird combo. It's like a I don't know. It's like, well, obviously films are big, but it's and Lord of the Rings was quite an important novel, but it's almost like a country or a part of the world riding on that whole thing. It's amazing. It's like a tourist industry.
Yeah. Massive tourism tie-in with the film board that got that thing made. Same with the Rings of Power that got made. Amazon, Zimbabwe. I was going to say the New Zealand. It's got Zeds in it. They've got Zeds in it.
Right, totally.
New Zimbabwe.
And so similar too.
The New Zealand film board and Amazon got together, and there's a massive tourism marketing angle that pays for part of the production. It's big business. It's not just a movie being made.
I was thinking back, like getting prepped for this interview, I was thinking like, Jesus, where did we start out? And I was thinking, wow, okay, digital directions with Hilton and all of that stuff.
It's amazing. Where did time go?
Okay, so let me get serious for a little bit here and say, sure. Okay, so you started studying computer programming. That's kind of how you started in the industry. And then digital directions was your first kind of serious, was your first move into the film industry? Is that right?
I studied engineering, and then got distracted halfway through engineering with a fantasy of getting into cell drawn animation.
Oh,
So
right, yeah.
it kind of messed up my studies by just sitting in the canteen drawing, and then I just ended up being training as a computer programmer. Got a job at banks and whatnot. I managed to, through my programming kind of contacts, managed to find a job just called Virtual Systems Laboratories. It was a tiny little startup, three of us, trying to do virtual reality walkthroughs of architectural projects. So, and that was back in, I'd say, 94, 93.
Yeah, what the hell was strapped to your head at that point?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
CRTs.
Yeah, no, yeah, literally. Those are the days of the W Industries. The big thing that you strap to your head in that little pterodactyl game. I don't know if you remember that. It was amazing. It was so full of imagination. Everyone was just so excited by the concept. Any kind of futurist like myself was so excited about it. So yeah, that's what we were trying to do on hardware that was very immature. It was called a Spearfire graphics card with 16 megabytes of RAM. It was like the fastest PC-based graphics card you could possibly buy. I think in that sliver of that 1 year.
Yeah.
And at that point, I met through contacts at that company, met Hilton Trevis and Andrew Jensen, and they came over and they took a look at what we were doing there. And I was, I was doing a little animation of a robot hand, kind of while we were looking for clients, So I was kind of doing this thing, and then they were like, "You,"
right.
So they fingered me, and then I was like, "You guys have got Silicon Graphics workstations, don't you?" And they were like, "Yes, we do." And that was the end of Virtual Systems Laboratories for me.
Right. Sound of a toilet flushing.
Yeah. But the chair is still spinning to this day.
Right.
But obviously that kind of company was way ahead of its time, and it couldn't have survived anyway. Maybe would have landed a few visualization projects, but I ended up going to Digital Directions and got involved in post-production visual. Well, wouldn't even call it visual effects at that point. It was just doing some animations. You're a jack of all trades. You do whatever's necessary. But I was on the 3D side, mostly involved with
commercials. Well, it's probably commercials, right?
Commercials, yeah, all commercials and commercial-like projects. Whatever people could afford. Quite a burgeoning industry there. There was probably, I don't know, 15 people involved in the computer graphics for post-production in total in the whole country. And we were 5 of them, I think, us boys in the box. And we would, be running Alias, Power Animator, and then Softimage 3.5, Prisms from Side Effects.
I mean, this predates Houdini and those kind of simulation programs and all of that stuff, right?
Yeah, it was a progenitor. Prisms was a progenitor of Houdini. It was made by the same company, but also with the kind of same sort of paradigm that they were going for, which is kind of a procedural. Wasn't exactly an artist tool; it was more of a technical tool. So you could create these more dynamic environments. But it took a lot of extra work just to do that. You couldn't sculpt as if you're, sculpting clay. You had to kind of define it with math and procedural functions.
Right.
We did that until 1999, I think. Yeah. Well, the transition, the company was bought out by the refinery.
Yeah, that's where our paths collided, right?
Our professional lives collided right there, right?
It was my first experience of being poached. I got poached to another company and my salary doubled from like very low to double very low. And I was like over the moon.
0. That's great. I mean, we were obviously, friends all our lives. And then like suddenly you were at the competitor post-production house in Johannesburg.
Right.
Before that.
The video lab, dun dun.
And then eventually we started working together.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you remember that we developed or tried to develop an animation series, which never got off the ground, called Cybershark.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah, we've still got some of those documents lying around.
I mean, looking back at it now, my thought is that, like, unless we were going for like a South Park or like a really hand-drawn crappy end, we never could have actually got it done. I mean, we believed that we somehow could do it, but realistically, that would have been the only way, right? If it was really, really lo-fi.
Yeah, with retrospect, we realize all the skills we were missing. Like a deep bench of skills that we would have had to muddle through. But, that's kind of the way it was then. I think, it was almost possible because there were very few people in the country that probably had those skills and would have to learn them on the fly,
Yeah. Well, thank heavens, no one gave us money.
No one gave us money. Well, we hardly did a pitch, so it's not surprising.
Okay.
Nobody just gave us money.
Yeah. Okay. But have you recently looked at episode 1 of The Simpsons?
I have not. No.
You must check it out. It's where the family dog, whatever his name is, Snurt or whatever. No, that's whatever. Anyway, the family dog joins the family. It's literally like it's hand drawn by kids. It's so crude and like globby, and it's really worth checking out.
I've looked at the old Futurama episodes and seen the same sort of evolution of the line style. Just improved, like everything seemed to settle. Season 3,
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing that you've actually got that kind of legroom to tweak this supposedly iconic stuff.
I think in the country there was probably 3 people that could have helped organize a project like the one that we were trying to organize. I don't know, people in our company, maybe 1 or 2 of them, Glenn Coppins, a few of them, 1 or 2 other individuals that might have had the producer chops to actually push this through.
A team of 100 people to actually do it. Like where? Like look left, look right. No, I don't see any people.
You're right. There was me and Jonty. I remember that.
But yeah, I mean, maybe this will lead us well onto our next topic when you jumped and went to digital domain. But I always had this from those early days. I always had this vision of you that you were very connected to online communities, international communities. Now, I mean, how did you make the link to those communities? Was it intrinsic that if you use this software, you kind of got linked into this user group? I mean, because for us in the colorist department, it was more just we had the Telesi Internet group, and that was kind of it,
No, it wasn't at all. It wasn't at all bundled with the industry at all. For instance, the software that I cottoned onto, which was Houdini, which is the successor to Prisms, there were probably, I don't know, I'm taking a wild guess here, but there were probably mere dozens of users of that program worldwide. I remember getting one of the cuts of that software sent to us on a CD-ROM. And it literally said on the CD-ROM, written in Sharpie, it said Houdini 0.9 alpha, and it was on a gold disc, so it was just they didn't have like a put together operation, there was a once a quarter newsletter, a double fold leaflet with some articles from some luminaries in the industry that was just, they were talking about various topics, and that was it for the community. So what we did is myself and Mark Horsfield, him and I decided to come up with a bulletin board. So we put together our own forum that we hosted on some server somewhere, downloaded some forum software. He wrote most of the backing code, the PHP code to kind of make this a reality. And I provided most of the interaction. I wrote tutorials in what we call the codex, and I wrote my experiences with how to, say, build shaders for Rythm and for Mantra and for various recipes for various things.
So you motherfuckers built it yourself. That is fucking amazing.
We built it ourselves. Yeah. And like, this is like late 90s, maybe 97, I'd say.
Yeah.
We started off with a fairly rudimentary custom job. And then after a while more, the forum software became open source and available just for free. So we downloaded that and reskinned it to look like our old website. And we started to take advantage of the open source community. But we completely built the user base from just him and me. And then, it was called oddforce.net. And it grew rapidly because, it's obviously just a well-desired resource, and we were always questioning, like, why doesn't side effects themselves have a forum? And they never did through those years. So we built, a few hundred members. And it's such limited knowledge that we all really learn a lot from each other. And, to this day, people search up questions, they Google them, and they'll find my responses from 2004, because I was eagerly posting for a good 10 years on oddforce.net. It was probably one of the most valuable career boosting things I could have possibly done.
Right.
Because, people that had never met me knew me by name via the website. It still happens today that people know my name from oddforce.net.
So that's like a really in crowd of the in crowd,
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think a lot of the content that I was interacting with got picked up in new university programs, like SCAD and all these kinds of Savannah College of Art and Design. They would pick up bits from those conversations. So the students all got to know my name because they'd have to, they'd end up going back to the sources where some of the course content actually originated.
Right.
And so that's how I met half the people I met in the industry, just indirectly through this weird little thing that we did.
And then official show, like going to SIGGRAPH and all that kind of that only came later, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Once you were actually based in the States. Okay. So basically, you knocked on Digital Domain's door, and then they said, "Oh, yeah, come on over."
Yeah, there's a little bit of a both. It happened both ways actually, because we had a colleague, David Prescott, who left Digital Domain. Sorry, Digital Directions. He left Digital Directions.
Yeah.
Me ended up at Digital Domain.
Yeah, in LA.
And so did my other colleague, Darren, and friend. Yeah, he bounced through Glassworks in the UK and then ended up also with David Prescott at Digital Domain. And so when I visited them, they were like, "You got to come," and I want to come. And then that was the end.
Yeah.
But 1998 was when I kind of met. I visited DD, and it took me about a year and a half to get my shit together before I could actually get over there and
working permits and all that stuff, right?
Working permits, just like I was kind of ingrained in my little environment in South Africa. So I found it hard to make the move, to make the mental and emotional leap.
Don't tell me. I was probably the last one of our little group to actually leave and spread my wings. So don't need to tell me about that.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard, and I ended up going to DD in the year 2000, June 2000.
Yeah,
and I immediately got put on some show. Got put on the last shot of a ride film, and then Time Machine, I think, was one of my first.
Could you tell us a bit about the company culture at Digital Domain then? I mean, was it considered a big player at that stage when you joined, or was it still kind of boutique speciality?
We thought it was a big player. We felt we were big players, and I think it was a significant company at that time. It kind of completed Titanic and True Lies. And, they were owned by Jim Cameron and Scott Ross. But then, they had a falling out, and Scott well, they split essentially, and Jim Cameron wanted nothing to do with DD at that point.
Yeah.
But we were still riding high from the Titanic days. There was a amazing young culture of really smart, energetic people, and I absolutely loved it. You know, it felt like the kind of second wave of digital domain, in a sense. Like the first wave was those first movies before the split, and then I arrived at the beginning of the second wave, as it were.
Yeah.
It was a kind of an irreverent company. Like, you could just, if you thought you could do it, you just tried to do it, and nobody would stop you, and nobody tried to pigeonhole anybody. It was a bit chaotic. The same sort of culture was also on the producer side of that company. There was a lot of competition between producers to kind of innovate and come up with the most, the most cost-effective, the biggest margins, and the most efficient production schedule possible. You know, they were kind of pitted against each other, and it worked for many years. But you can't really keep that up for too long, right? You have to change your pattern after a while. Like all these kind of young tech companies, goes through crazy innovation and then has to pay the piper at some point.
Standardize.
Yeah, exactly. And, start thinking about, like, maybe we should actually have a training department and, HR. Maybe HR should get involved because it's crazy here. But it was great. I learned so much in the company. I have undying love for it.
And what specific roles were you doing? Because you obviously had this connection to Houdini, and you mentioned Titanic. That's just all about water simulations, and presumably that's Houdini's main function, right? Would have been that kind of thing.
Well, Houdini wasn't really around in the days of Titanic. That was actually done by a piece of specialized software, for the most part, called Arete, which is Jerry Tessendorf's software. I know I mentioned his name because I ended up working with him at a later date at Rythm and Hues.
Right.
But the FFT, like sine wave decomposition of waves, was kind of his
FFT is Fourier transform, right?
Yeah, fast Fourier transform. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, right.
So it's an accelerated way of doing lookup into this kind of multi-frequency space that is represented by lots of sine waves that overlap, travel together. So that was the kind of the basis of most of the ocean waves. But that was prior to like true blue simulation. That was an analytical method. But proper old simulation, computational fluid dynamics, that stuff really started for me when working on The Day After Tomorrow, which was at DD.
Okay, so just to pause a second there. So you could simulate waves, but you couldn't simulate them crashing into anything. They would just keep going.
Yeah, exactly. They had no dynamical properties.
You'd have to use traditional 2D methods to occlude them and things like that. Whereas a Houdini simulation is actually, you set an environment, you set gravity, you set, where's north, where's south, and the particles just have properties and they have their own behavior and off they go.
Yeah, exactly. They, with the kind of the FFT tool set, like you'd have to hack it. You'd have to create these waves that would maybe go towards the ship hull, and then you'd try and synthesize some reflecting waves. You do another kind of version of them where they're traveling away from the ship hull, and then you layer the two together, and then you try and get that idea of interaction, and then the type of simulation tools you had then were more just particle simulation.
Right.
In particle simulation, you can throw thousands, maybe tens of thousands of particles if you have a big machine at the time.
Right.
And you could create some sort of a faux interaction. You could take each one of those particles, and each one of those particles could have basically the image of white water on it, like a little piece of white water.
Right.
That might animate or fade. And so as they kind of move away from the ship hull, you'd get this illusion of interaction. But it was very naive, rudimentary simulation. Just the rest is manual labor, like hard tricks.
Right.
Late nights.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it more recently, but this doesn't sound like your situation. But I get this picture that people that work in small countries that I've been in, like South Africa and Taiwan, and when they get a chance to go and work in the States at a big company, like in South Africa, they're an animation supervisor and they're running the whole thing. But when they go to a big facility, they basically like get in charge of Thor's left toenail on this foot, and that's it. That's what they like, a small cog in a much bigger wheel. Obviously, this sounds different to what you were doing, because you were kind of chucked in at the, you were fully operational.
Yeah, I mean, I came from like a generalist environment, which was post-production.
Right.
So I had like a bit of experience with a lot of things. I was really drawn to the effects stuff, right? The kind of complicated natural effects that are more equation driven, and when I say equation, like some of them are really simple equations. You're just adding a sine wave and an offset over time. Yeah. Sometimes they get more elaborate than that, but at that stage, you're just kind of trying to orchestrate complexity. I had done some animation and some modeling and some texturing and all those things. I didn't pursue that. There are some ridiculous levels of specialization. I think kind of what you're talking about there's, I think at ILM, there was a toes and tails team that all they would do for the dinosaurs of Jurassic Park is, I'm doing the tail, you're doing the toes, while the primary animator does all the primary keyframes, and you might even have somebody that'll be handling the tweening, the in-betweening, the kind of interpolation through the motion.
Yeah, like anything less than X kilograms or anything that wiggles goes to that department.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously people get good at it, and you write a specialized little tool set for the toes and tails team to make it easier for the toes and tails to be done efficiently and en masse,
Yeah. I got the impression just from our various discussions, random discussions over the years, that you weren't, what you've been talking about up till now is you've been talking about essentially being an artist, being in the seat, getting a creative brief, working on a shot. But from what I gather is you were also dealing with back-end, pipeline, how the facility, what file format we're using, how do we manage our assets? I mean, can you tell us a bit about that? At DD, Digital Domain, were you already doing that?
Yeah. I mean, I started off just doing effects for the first few years. But it was pretty apparent, we didn't really have a pipeline department. And, just to be clear about what the pipeline layer is, like a layer of developers that are just trying to, they're just trying to push files around on disk. They want to formalize how files are read and written, and how maybe production data make it to the artist, like what task are you working on? What's the frame range of that task? And where can I find the reference images for, where can I find the slates? Where can I find the footage? All the pipeline department kind of handles all that.
Because if you're working on Superman, then everyone at some stage needs Superman's cape and Superman's underpants and Superman's boots and Superman's. There's an archive or a wardrobe for each character, and everyone has to have that, right? Yeah,
exactly. And they have you basically have a call sheet for these assets that need to be in every shot. Here's Superman's. Obviously he has to wear his underwear, but this time he's wearing his dirty underwear. You have to know which phase of the movie, and then which narrative component you need. Right. And so that's called the call sheet. But all that, all this stuff really didn't exist in a very complete way at DD when I got there. Just very rudimentary stuff. So I quickly got involved. I had programming experience, so I quickly jumped in there and started to code new frameworks for submitting our work to the render farm. That's kind of where it started, because it was a highly risky situation. Like you'd work until 10 p.m. and you try and get your stuff rendering on the render farm, and things would just fail left, right, and center for any reason under the sun. But so I took it on myself to rewrite that whole framework, and that's kind of that's how I got started on the tech side in this industry.
Okay, and then that is you're doing color management as well. Presumably, there's color decisions.
Color management.
Quote, like in big scare quotes, like what is that?
yeah. I mean, when I first arrived, right, it was all film. Like we were shooting to film. If you wanted your stuff reviewed, you'd have to queue it up for overnights for dailies.
Wow.
And so those would come in the morning, right? You remember these days.
Yeah.
You'd get the one lights or the dailies is.
Yeah,
and,
rushes.
you would read it out in the screening room, the color points, and you're like, well, this red +2, whatever. And you'd all have to imagine what this thing looked like, less red, when they start playing it on a loop. Like, oh, this is redder than it will be when they put it through. Like
you're talking 35 mil. You're talking 35 mil print at this stage.
35 mil print, yeah. So you're reviewing your stuff. You might do your little. You might be able to do some of your flip books. Your little playbacks.
Yeah.
On your workstation, but you really could not play back more than 50 frames before you start to run out of memory. So you could only get a couple of seconds in memory. So you'd have to either shoot it to a DDR down the passageway, or you submit it for one lights, and it'll go off to dailies. Yeah,
but presumably the dailies there's a budget limit. You can't do that every day, etc. There's limits on that.
Oh yeah.
Did your digital suites have a print LUT to view through, so that you could kind of guess feel what it would look like once through the printing process?
No, none of us had any idea really. You're basically working in sRGB, or just you were, without knowing it, right? You were just kind of consuming textures with color space baked into them, and then you'd re-render them back in a linear space, and they'd end up in that same sort of space. They'd end up back in, but the luminance computations don't take into account any of that. So you'd have basically linear illumination mixed with sRGB textures.
Right, already flattened.
So you get what looks like a lit thing, but it was wrong, and
yeah, it's lit from the other side already. Yeah.
Yeah. But you're like, oh, it looks lit, and like, yeah, but why doesn't it look quite real?
It was lit 5 months ago.
Yeah, exactly. And oh man, I remember the compositors. The compositors themselves were the brunt.
Exactly. That they were doing the corrections manually.
Yeah. They would kind of receive match clips, from the edit, and they were like, the match clips are like literal little pieces of film,
Right.
And they would compare the results, and then tweak one till it looked like the other one. And then that's the best we could do, really. When I first got there was no. I wasn't exposed to much color talk. I know it stressed out the color people we had on a daily basis. But as an artist at that point, you're just generating pictures, and the compositors are cramming it into a space and adding whatever all the mush that they need to add to it.
Nip and tuck. Yep.
Nip and tuck to get it in line with the match clip, and then you look at it and it looks pretty good, or I don't know why it doesn't look that good, but hey, we just go and tweak it more in comp. The pain was never transmitted to the artist, because the artist had very limited tools to. Sorry, the 3D artist, trying to say. The 3D artist had limited tools to do anything about it, even if they did understand it. And in those days, there was what a mysterious topic color was,
Right, exactly, yeah.
It's still a topic that, like, most people, you could explain to them, they'll nod all the way through a 2-hour presentation and then forget about it the next day. They're like, they can't, you won't be able to connect, A to B. You're like, I know, I understood it yesterday, but now there's a key immediate component that's just evaporated.
And you're sitting under one of the most complex color mysteries that still plagues us today is film emulation. Everything, even though you were doing everything, a mix of linear and already scene display referred, and everything all mushed together, manually tweaked, then shot out to film through, I guess, which was probably just Cineon, something to some LUT or something that the film lab had, and there you go, it projected on a screen. And that's so it was very much by today's standards kind of cobbled together. I mean, to be honest, I'm speaking to a lot of people now who are saying it's always cobbled together. Don't fool yourself that it's all run by science. It's always cobbled together, and it's an art, and it is a painting. On some level, it's a painting. So we're always making choices about lighter, darker. Lighter things protrude, darker things recede, and that's it. That's the art. Don't get fooled by the science will take care of it for me. At the end of the day, you're still making those artistic story decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably true for most filmmaking. There's probably a vast section of filmmaking nowadays or that doesn't care about that component. They just dismiss it. They're like, technically correct color, just what I saw in my viewfinder, it's probably fine. We'll just make movies. I'm not turning color into an art here. I just want consistency.
I want what I saw on set.
No, you're completely right. I mean, as an artist in those days, I mean, still to this day, I guess, if you create an image, you as an artist, you maybe spend a lot of time trying to get, say, this cloud or this fireball to pop. You get the colors to separate. You get the right contrasts internally, and you're tweaking math gradients. Maybe like density fall-offs. You're tweaking. You're wangling the black body spectrum. You might have a color ramp that you're screwing with, and you get it to pop, and you get like, yeah, right now that's the best looking fireball I can possibly manage. By the time it gets through comp and DI, you don't recognize it on screen. Wow, they added a sepia. It looked way better on my monitor. So for every shot you ever make, you hit that same tragic realization. You're like, God damn, that looked amazing on my. It flew by, in a sneeze. And it didn't look like what it looked like on my monitor.
And when you saw it, it was the center of the shot. But now Tom Cruise is fucking standing in front of it. God damn it!
Nobody cares about your firewall.
Okay. Just to round off the digital domain era. I seem to remember that you were living next to or in the same neighborhood as the Jackass people. And I never met them. I never saw them when I came to visit you, but that kind of worried me a bit. I had the feeling that anything could have happened. So those were interesting times for you, right?
Oh yeah, I mean my landlord was a dealer. He lived above me, and I could tell. But those are kind of crazy times. Digital domain was nestled in Venice Beach,
right?
For most of its time over there. Then moved slightly down the road. Also Venice Beach. When it was in Venice Beach, I lived, the Walk Street 2 blocks over, and my life, good 7-8 years of my life was just walking around 6 blocks square, and getting all kinds of trouble because it's a very
colorful neighborhood.
yeah. People doing all kinds of things. The boardwalk itself is full of life and
Yeah.
uh, a little bit sketchy, a little bit crazy, a little bit a little artistic.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that era. And a bunch of aspiring Jackass-like filmmakers,
Right.
including my crazy landlord.
Yeah. Okay. So then, what was your next stop Rythm and Hues?
Yeah. I love DD, but DD became DD 2.0. Sold itself to some other people that came in, and it got a little bit crazy, got a little bit political at that point. So I decided that I wanted to try something new. Went over to Rythm and Hues to work on another Rob Cohen movie, The Mummy 3. That was the movie they cajoled me over with.
Wait a second, stop a second. So basically, you had Charlize Theron in Digital Domain with Aeon Flux. You had Arnold Vosloo at Rythm and Hues. I see the connection here, man. Yeah, it's a South African connection.
Oh, man, I didn't even see that connection. Rythm and Hues had a very different mentality. They were kind of like the older brother in the room kind of a thing. They were more mature. They were just calmer. Very kind of healthy internal operations in that company. Very respectful. The CEO himself, would be seen in the morning washing dishes.
Right.
So there was just this like mellow, homely vibe. I thought I was going to lose my mind, but I grew to love it. It was very. I kind of blossomed there in a sense. Like they gave me a lot to do,
Right.
a lot of leeway. They allowed me to be an effects soup, then to be a lighting supervisor. Lighting soup in Rythm and Hues is almost an entirely technical role, not a creative role.
Right.
But you are involved indirectly in the creative components because you have to kind of technically deliver them all. And at that point became like the effects development supervisor. So I was looking after all the effects tooling for the company-wide and the lighting tooling at some point.
So it's not just production specific, it's actually backbone as well, structure of the company, yeah.
Oh, yeah, no show-specific stuff.
It's like you're tooling the rental house, the quote-unquote, the digital rental house with types of lights, and then people can come and choose them for their productions.
Yeah, if it all works healthily, you kind of... You're developing them and testing them and maturing that tool on the show you're working on, and then you gain the trust for that tool, and then it's always available, it's always available company wide for other shows. There's often not enough trust in it yet, so they want to see like a show done in it before people start adopting it.
Yeah,
but then you're getting into like software development practices and change management, rollouts, stakeholdership. It's all real important stuff, but that's kind of gets more deeply into the.
Yeah, I do want to touch on that later because I think that's really what these big companies have actually offered. They end up rolling out a lot of tool. They work on just the water on Titanic, and hence a product emerges, and that becomes the plugin in Adobe. That would be the equivalent now.
Yeah. I mean, I think like many of the tools that are developed in visual effects houses, they don't. Many of them don't leave. They stay there. They're actually they just serve as some sort of exemplar in a sense for software companies that develop DCCs. Digital content creation software like Houdini and Maya. Yeah. They will see what people have done on shows, often with good marketing and good documentation in SIGGRAPH or conferences like that. And then they'll develop it themselves, trying to
Right. Okay. So it's a mimicry process. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and usually, the big VFX houses would kind of lead the way, that would inspire some software companies to develop similar looking tools, and that would empower the smaller houses that don't have the development budget to do what the big software houses do.
Yeah, to just take all the wires that are dangling out the back and ram it into a case and then make it a product.
Well, that's the thing. It's like I keep making this. I keep joking that we have like specialized renderers and some really amazing tech, but I wouldn't wish it upon the general public.
Right.
It's definitely a captive audience tool.
Right.
Like it might, it would not fly. Some of these tools would just not fly in the public sphere because maybe you have to, I don't know, when you hit go, it has to do a 15-minute crunch or prep or compilation or something before it becomes, usable. And you can't, you'd never sell a tool that requires a 15-minute crunch. You'd have to figure out a way of doing it in less than 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of these tools would never make it.
And at this stage in Rythm and Hues, so this is kind of 2010, round about there. Is that roughly the era? Somewhere
2000,
around there?
Yeah. 2007 is when I went.
Oh, 7 earlier. Okay. And so, like, were you now? Yeah, just to touch the color pipeline button. Is anything changed now? Are we still going to film, or are we doing digital deliveries, or is color management coming in yet? Have we matured on that side yet?
Yeah, so that was interesting. And at DD, maybe it was 2003 or something. We had one of our visual effects. Well, now he became a visual effects supervisor, but one of our artists called Dan Lemon was a guy that was the first person to kind of describe color in a way that was understandable to artists. We had a couple of color guys that worked on Nuke. We owned Nuke at that point, and worked on all the color tools inside of Nuke, but they didn't really. They weren't very good communicators.
Right.
So, but Dan Lemon was good. He managed to bring this all to the artists. He described how you take sRGB images. You might take a scan, then you might want to linearize it. Then you might, then you render in linear space and apply a LUT on that to put it back in the space that you're meant to be viewing it in. And so you keep it as linear as possible throughout the pipeline, and then the LUT gets applied downstream on the way to the DI, and that's that was a big step for us, where we're like, okay, we're doing it the right way now. And that was only the first step, right? That was like, that was just, let's just apply the kind of sRGB function, which is basically a 1D function.
Yeah.
But quickly on the tail end of that, I remember there was, there came the 3D LUTs came rushing in, and you had like the Iridas frame cycler and Commander, and you'd have a couple of these products that would support a 3D LUT being applied. You could do it offline inside of Nuke.
Yeah.
But these things started to apply these things on the fly inside, just in the viewing pipeline. So it pushed forward into the artist's hands, the 3D artist's hands, tools that would usually be available only to compositors.
Right.
And then, in that era, I remember there was like, we're characterizing the monitors that we had. So every person would have essentially every person with a unique monitor would have their own LUT that they'd view through, because it would correct.
Show LUT plus a correction for the calibration LUT for their monitor. Brilliant. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And that was like that helped a lot. I think I think it helped a lot. It was fed to us in a way that was like easy to understand and tooled quite simply, so we could use it without messing up.
Yeah. At least you don't have to totally imagine what it's going to look like. You're kind of in the rough ballpark. Obviously, it's not on a projector, it's on a monitor, all those differences. It's small, it's not big, etc., etc. But hopefully closer.
Exactly. And at that very same time, we kind of switched from, LDR rendering, we'd always write out to like an LDR file, like low dynamic range file format.
Right.
But then we extended it so that, it would start to be an HDR file format. At that stage, there was like .RGB images, which were SGI images.
Right.
And we made RGBE images, which had a shared mantis, shared exponent, sorry. And, you'd store them and mantises in the RGB. And
so is it your specular exposure on top? Is it something like that? It's like a 2-layer file.
It's just like a multiplier to shift the whole thing up and down.
Oh, okay.
So,
right. Okay.
So you'd end up being able to render images that preserve some level of HDR capability. I mean, we couldn't go full 16-bit or 32-bit at that point. I don't think we had the disk space or the hardware, memory to kind of hold a true floating point HDR pipeline in memory.
Yeah.
So we'd do this kind of halfway step,
right.
So it's kind of a quantized thing. You're working with some sort of a quantized data because you're sharing the exponent between the 3 color bands.
Right.
But it worked quite well for a little while. So I think as we kind of got better at that and we stepped up to OpenEXR became a file format that I think in the late 2000s that allowed us to render to 16-bit, 32-bit.
Floating point,
LUTs. Yeah. And so that together with the LUTs, finally we started to get things in space, because there were times where you'd see the LUT would be applied to an LDR image and you'd see the banding and you'd see, milkiness or lifted blacks where they shouldn't be lifted.
Right.
But as soon as we kind of went up to the 16-bit, 32-bit, like those all corrected themselves, incrementally. We ended with a more sophisticated color pipeline. And then I think at the end of that term, I think in late 2009 or so, there was OpenColor.io that was an open source library.
I don't use it directly, but in the context of Nuke and other packages that use it, hear of it all the time.
So in that same software library, like a lot of the vendors picked up and integrated it, and that meant that they could either do offline color space mapping, or they could also do some. There was also like GPU shaders and whatnot that would allow you to kind of do this really fast for the sake of bit viewing.
Yeah.
So that changed everything at that point. Like suddenly color was accurate.
And were you still? I mean, you mentioned GPU shaders, but were you? Is this still CPU render farms at this stage? Presumably the GPU thing hasn't taken off yet. Okay.
Yeah. CPU render farms. Yeah. We still do 99% of our rendering software in CPU.
You want the exact. You don't want the. It's a shortcut.
Yeah. It's mostly about memory limits and constraints that the GPU impose upon you now. That makes it awkward to develop for it. At scale, there's more flexibility in CPU place.
Right, the CPU is totally open. Yeah, that's interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
All right. So, were you around for the Life of Pi glory and tragedy at Rythm and Hues?
I was. I was. It was actually it was quite a moment. We moved offices to El Segundo, to this 8-story office building. It was great. We had this whole compound. It was amazing. Life of Pi was a rewarding movie to see. Actually, I wasn't actually directly on it. I was doing pipeline work for the whole facility. It was quite a movie to watch being made. And we got really busy around that time. We got multiple shows in, and then we we took on too much. We we took on too much. A couple of bad investment decisions by our CEO, and then some hardline requirements from studios, and
right.
touched zero, and we erupted. Yeah. There's a saying I keep on wanting to bring up, and I can't really remember how it goes, but it's like, there's no first prize for lowest flight.
Well, there's a very dire consequence for low flight below a certain level.
Yeah.
Hard clip.
Get low, but no lower. Yeah, anyway, so we bankrupted. I was one of the survivors of that whole thing, actually. I maintained a company called Prana bought us out, and I maintained employment there for another 4 years. A lot of people just thought that Rythm and Hues had totally gone out of business and wasn't operating anymore in those 4 years. Right. So that's a bit of a tragedy, because we had a fairly healthy pipeline at that point. We were polishing that car in the garage.
Right.
Ferris Bueller's Day Off style. This car was beautiful, and we were never allowed to drive it.
So was that just the gossip that Rythm and Hue had imploded, and hence it wasn't trustworthy or something like that had spread through the industry?
I think it was a marketing failure internally. I think that we lost our producers with the black books and
right, studio connections.
We just didn't put ourselves out there. We probably should have renamed ourselves or something,
Yeah.
And because we did kind of at that stage, we'd been kind of focusing on a lot of in-house software. We had this software package called Voodoo, and we had our renderer called Ren. But we'd kind of grown out of Ren, and we'd kind of switched to a more dynamic, more kind of Houdini-like, and another lighting tool that we'd written internally. We kind of switched up our pipeline quite significantly, and were a lot more kind of nimble and than what Rythm and Hues was before.
Great to see that kind of R&D can mature into something. But the R&D runs on productions, and if they're not coming in the door, so then how did the next step was to Weta in New Zealand? How did that, what were the forces that drove you there?
The step after that, I returned to DD.
Oh, okay.
I returned to DD for my second tour of duty, and I returned as a production technology supervisor, which is a great role. For me, I enjoyed it a lot. You get to exert some oversight and involvement in all the workflows that you can help with. Especially the ones that are touching back-end shots production. Kind of a pre-production side of it is a beast unto itself.
Sure.
But yeah, the back-end workflows I had a lot more familiarity with. But yeah, that was my second tour of duty at DD, at DD 3.0. It had then been bought out by, it had bankrupted itself. It had its own little adventure
right.
With the bank. I joked at the time, I was like, oh, DD also bankrupted, but as usual, they did it better than us.
They're experienced at this. They're old hands at this bankruptcy game.
Yeah, of course. But anyway, I returned to the fold. The industry pressure to kind of leave LA was quite intense in those 4 years. Most visual effects houses had already left LA. There was no presence of DreamWorks and any of these, DreamWorks still exists, sorry, but there was massive pressure to find tax incentive markets, right? These incentivized markets that have rebates.
It's a cornerstone of film production, like where can you raise your money, and hence where you have to spend your money. But presumably this was the era when people like ILM and everyone were opening up in Shanghai and in India and all those, or maybe it even predates that.
There was pressure for DD to follow the same pattern. They had a healthy Vancouver branch. They were just spinning up a Montreal branch. They had an India branch. So for myself, it was like, well, I feel the pressure to relocate. I either have to relocate to Vancouver or I try something new. And at that stage, the Weta thing came around.
And you were kind of old enough to appreciate the quiet life.
Yeah, it's quite quiet here now. So, Wellington's not LA.
It's not Venice Beach.
It's not Venice Beach. Yeah. It's not even Vancouver. But Weta is one of these companies that managed to maintain its kind of its footprint. It's when I arrived, didn't have any satellites. It didn't feel the pressure to go out to other territories. The tax incentives and whatnot kind of kept it wholesome. It being a Pete Jackson company, it was something he cared quite deeply about, and kept it going in its kind of consolidated form.
It had this like a stream of iconic content going through there. So yeah, it was a great brand. Still is, right? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and he didn't want to jeopardize that at all, right? It's a powerhouse in a bubble.
Right.
That's what it feels like. It feels like we're in this nice little cohesive bubble here.
Okay, just to veer back to the technical, in terms of rendering and color pipelines, so things are all different now, right? So we're not just good old RGB ray tracing. We're upgrading here. We're supercharging at Weta, right?
You can read all about the architecture of the renderer that we use. It's called Manuka, and it's a spectral renderer, which basically means that we put a lot of diligence into creating a shading models and emulating light sources, camera responses in spectral color space, so that we end up with just higher fidelity images. But that's not all we get out of it, right? With Spectral, you get some unique artifacts that you won't get. It's a light simulation. It's closer to light simulation than RGB rendering, and so even if you had to use it for rendering some ground truth images, you can see the difference in certain situations. Something that you can't really emulate. But, if you knew what the ground truth was in all those situations, then maybe you could emulate it with an RGB pipeline.
Both routes are quote unquote fictitious, but there's no.
Yeah. It's slightly less fictitious.
Why is traditional RGB rendering not good enough? Like, where does it fall apart? What benefits are you getting?
RGB rendering, just RGB as a representation of color is, it works well for us, I guess, the kind of tri-stimulus response of our eyes closely match that of RGB phosphors, but when it comes to rendering, there are some effects that you can't emulate in RGB space. You'll get some thin film interference. You can get richer hues out of that. The spectrum that's returned in that computation is not a hack. You're not
right.
You're not taking an RGB response and then momentarily trying to solve it in spectral color space and then reflattening it to RGB, because that's what a lot of renderers try and do. For some effects, right? Some subsurface scattering, for instance, is obviously light hits the skin, penetrates the skin, and scatters in multiple directions. That scattering extinction has a certain spectral effect.
Right.
It's got a spectral extinction. Most RGB renderers these days will just momentarily do that computation as best it can in spectral color space and then yield an RGB result.
Right.
We don't do that. Our light sources have a spectral representation.
Yeah.
The surface receives the light source in the various bandwidths, the various spectral bandwidths.
Yeah.
And then it all is scattered in a kind of a faithful fashion, and then yielded as a spectral response.
Yeah. So every object has its reflectance and various other, emission or reflectance, all those good things. Now, just in terms of, I guess it's a resolution question. So in RGB, the texture that you're gluing onto this 3D object is literally, it's got RG and B. Now, when you're going to are these spectra of each of these reflectance or light sources, are they vector, or are they just essentially raster, but more than just 3 values? You know what I mean? RGB being 3 values, do you fill in with like 10 values and it's still a list of 10, or is it actually a vector thing with you got every single value?
Yeah, you can pick your number of bands when you're doing spectrum. A common model is like a 6-band spectral or 7-band spectral.
Right.
Where you'll just divide up the spectral range into those little nanometer buckets.
Yeah.
And you'll send samples, down each one of those, weighted by the light source spectral response.
Yeah, how much power it's got in each of those, and then the surface will reflect or absorb in each of those, and then your camera also has 6 pixels. Yeah, six sites, 6 sensors for each pixel.
The camera's component is a bit of black magic to me, but
okay.
No, we represent the camera sensitivity, I believe, with a spectral response.
Right.
So this is we call it physilighting. Obviously about physical. Right. So we it gets quite hairy and technical, down in the details. So forgive me if I get some of these. No,
totally. This is black hole territory for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, you might say luminance have a spectral response. So say if they have a spectral, like if they LED, for instance, they're kind of spiky spectra.
Yeah, that hump in the blue. Yeah.
Exactly. It could be an incandescent with like a full band spectrum. Nice smooth bell, and those all interact with materials that have their own spectral responses to those things. All that light is gathered into the camera sensor, which has its spectral response. That's basically modeled off measured data from real world cameras. So all of these are using real world values all over them, recognizable numbers. When we talk about interference, we like, well, it's a 600 nanometer soap bubble,
right.
Interference. So we kind of we try and model all these things on real world numbers, real world effects, and with a pretty faithful simulation.
So is it a case where you say, okay, the live action is being shot on ARRI, so our digital camera in the CG must be an ARRI, and we're going to model that. Right. Okay, that's excellent.
Yeah. I mean, I know it gets hairy at the end, because they use all kinds of cameras and there's some coping going on after all of this is done, But we try and leave the coping till the very last phase.
The compositor, round of applause for the compositors and the colorists for ramming it all together.
The places that the pipeline sings is when we're doing things like, did you see Avatar 3, the very first sequence of Neytiri singing in the firelight? It's a kind of a hauntingly beautiful little song, and the firelight's playing off her skin.
Right.
But if you look at it, you're like, when I looked at it, I was quite impressed. I was like, that looks like blue skin under firelight.
Right.
And I can't tell you why. It's really because the look development is all done in a calibrated space. The illuminants are all calibrated. So when you then provide it with a certain new illuminant, it reacts in a way that's realistic.
Right.
And so her skin looked almost black, looked dark.
Yeah.
And you're like, you'd never do that in an RGB rendering pipeline. I think you'd end up with a look, and you might say that looks like fine. She looks fine in that file. You probably get it wrong. Is what I'm saying. The simulation looks right, and that's where it just pays off. I think on Planet of the Apes movies, Manuka was in its infancy, and the whole physical model was developed in that era of Weta. I wasn't here, but. There was a very underexposed, gritty kind of movie, and it just looked right because everything was calibrated together, and it just felt like it was done the right way. Didn't feel like we were rendering something and just jamming it into the color space of the camera at the end of the day by eye. I'm sure there was some of that. I'm not trying to wax lyrical too much.
Yeah.
But for a ground truth scenario, it feels pretty close.
And that's a hard example because it's hair and eyeballs and all that kind of stuff. So it's often the hardest stuff to do.
When I first got there, I had these kind of cynical questions of like, do we really need it? Because there's, a spaceship in full band sunlight. Doesn't look any different, quite honestly.
Yeah.
It looks the same. And, 90% of the images we render are like that. They're basically like, hard surface objects flying through space, flying through the air or whatnot. So, 90% of the time, it does not make a difference. It makes a difference when you're in like interior settings. For instance, the secondary and tertiary reflections take on a different feel when it's rendered in spectral rendering.
My hand-wavy reason would be that once the lights hit object A, its spectra is different now. The spectra has been modified. So when it hits object B, it's now tinted blue, tinted whatever, and that it's got a history to it. I don't know if that's a standard procedure in RGB ray tracing or not.
Yeah, I think it's probably it's probably extension of something around that. Yeah. Where like where you're going down, you're losing components, right? You're losing spectral intensities as you kind of bounce around, and it's in a way that kind of shifts the colors more so than it does with an RGB renderer then.
And presumably when it's anything that's opaque, like got a slight opacity to it, is milky, is smoke and all those things, it kind of also pays off very well. And anything that's got interesting flares or glares or...
any absorption.
Really optical, yeah.
I don't know if you remember that movie. I've got the code name in my head. The Valerian. The characters in that movie, there's a lot of close-up heads of these characters that have got got little bio-illume dots on their faces or something, and little pearlized components. And you're like, wow, that is some special treatment that's going on there.
Because actually glowing inside the skin a little bit.
It's got an otherworldliness, but it looks super accurate, otherworldliness somehow. And I think that's due to the spectral nature of that renderer. We also, we model things. Speaking of bioluminescence, we have plenty of that in the Avatar movies. People have got like dots on their skin that glow. There's underwater stuff that glows.
Yeah.
Phosphorescence is also something that's properly modeled. Phosphorescence is weird because it doesn't look like an energy preserving surface. You're like, why is this orange vest so bright?
Yeah.
And the reason why is it's absorbing, it's absorbing spectra from other wavelengths, and emitting it in the wavelength of the object.
Many inputs, only one output. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you're summing them up and beaming them out, and that's something that that we emulate fairly accurately inside of Manuka. You don't have to hack the energy preserving nature of it. Like it's energy preserving in each band. It can be thought of as a white elephant gift, as in like you have to do some things. You have to maintain a healthy spectral forward pipeline.
I was going to ask you about the simple fact of textures, which are mostly photographs, right? How the hell do you get them into being, qualifying to be spectrally?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I mean, there are you have to hallucinate the spectrum. I love using that word. It's a popular word in visual effects, but as a technical word. You have to hallucinate what it will be like, because white light, obviously, an LED can give you what looks like white light, to the human eye, but it's not. It's So we have to do this. We call it, it's called uplift. So we have to uplift from RGB into spectra, into the spectrum, and we do that in multiple ways. Most of the time, that's kind of there's an analytical method to kind of do this in a blunt and fast way. That's kind of adequate for most textures. But when you start talking about very powerful influences on the scene, like image-based lighting, then you start to want to do this with a bit more rigor. And there are algorithms out there that do this via learned responses, right? If an image kind of looks like this, they train it on synthetic data that is then downgraded to RGB and then uplifted back.
Compare the results.
Response.
Right.
So some of the models are trained.
I was going to say it's probably a great thing for machine learning, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we use machine learning in small ways in Manuka. For other things too. We use it for guessing where indirect light is going to come from, for instance. But on the uplift topic, still there's sometimes it's user guided. If the textures are of vegetation, we give it a hint. We say, hey, this has got a chlorophyll uplift.
Okay.
It actually produces a different spectra that looks different in different illuminants, based, just because of the presence of chlorophyll. So we can do that to kind of add that extra bit of durability to that asset we're producing. So just like with a Nutiri skin, like we know that we've got the skin modeling right when it looks good in the different illuminants that we provided, when it looks real.
Yeah.
When it has matching responses to live data.
So there's this pre-stage of kind of categorization. You're not just like saying machine go calculate. You're actually doing a bit of hand holding through the process. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to do that, and there's obviously every one of us companies do a lot of diligence when it comes to like processing IBLs, HDRs for the sake of
what's an IBL? What's an IBL?
An IBL is image-based lighting. So that basically means taking a lat long image, which is like a polar map essentially of an image. You've seen the gray balls, the gray ball and the silver ball.
Yeah,
and you can unwrap that silver ball into a map if you want to. You take bracketed exposures of those so that you end up with a high dynamic range image.
Yeah.
And then you can open them up, and the only part of the image that's really missing is behind the ball. You can obviously compromise resolution on the on the grazing angles, but you can unwrap it. If you don't have a specialized device to take it. A long image.
So that goes around your 3D object, and you blast light in through all around it, and it essentially gives you your scene.
Yeah, exactly.
Directional lighting. Okay.
We take that image. It's an HDR image, so values of the sun might be 10,000.
Yeah.
If you do it right, the values are up there.
Yeah.
Sometimes the values are way lower. So because of the recording equipment or time constraints on set or whatever is going on. So you have to do a lot of diligence anyway. You have to. Most companies will do the same thing. They'll extract the brightest parts of the scene, the light sources in the scene, blot them out of the background, and extract them as full, controllable individual light sources that they can later control and balance and play with more inside of the lighting phase.
Okay, so it's a bit of a combo. It's not just the sphere
combo,
around.
Yeah, you can just use it verbatim, but then your hands are tied. Then you have to do image editing in order to get that right. So most of us just kind of run routines that carve out the little spots and estimate their distance from camera. Sometimes even from the object. So that you can get some sort of a 3-dimensional. Movement, depending on the light source. Obviously, sunlight is
pretty far.
It's infinitely far away.
Yeah.
But in some cases, like a warehouse or whatever, you might have spotlights, lights in the ceiling, and we'll extract those and put them in some sort of dimensionalization, so that a character moving around will get highlights moving across the surface in a different way.
Yeah.
We try and leave most of the uplift process as a kind of a just-in-time uplift inside of the heart of Manuka.
Right.
Just because, we store all these images in standard file formats, like EXR, RGB, as they were kind of recorded. So we try not to write out the spectral rasters in any form. They're kind of magically uplifted. All the stuff is done on them internally inside of Manuka, and then
in the render process, when you actually hit go on the render, because that would have huge data implications if you had to you only want the complexity when you need it. But if the camera and the lights aren't facing that way, you don't need the complexity.
That is true, and that's always been an argument against the whole pipeline.
Oh, okay. Oops.
It's it's like a standing argument, because there are renderers that are specialized for different things, the speed, or some features, whatever. So there's always a small component of people that are like, hey, we should try this other rendering technique, because the Spectral is not going to give us any extra vavavoom in this shot, because it's it's a spaceship outside again. Let's try something else. But obviously, it's not as simple as that, because there's a lot of trust and knowledge built up about how Manuka does its thing. Manuka, renderers over the years have changed a lot. You've probably heard some of the words going around, but in the old days,
yep,
in the 90s or whatever, well, in the 60s, ray tracing was invented,
right?
But was very quickly shelved because it just was not fast enough. So ray tracing, as in through each pixel from the image, you're shooting a ray out and striking the scene, and then trying to calculate the incident light on that object.
Right.
Recursive ray tracing got invented, which would then trace rays from those out and try and gather more information.
Right.
But then those all too slow. So went back to kind of to rasterization, which is essentially taking polygons, dicing them down into like small little polygons that you do a lighting calculation on. And then you just splat them on top of each other like it's using what's called a painter's algorithm. So you draw the things at the back first, and you use Z4, and then you just draw the ones closest to your last, and bam, you're done.
Right.
You've basically rasterized the polygon onto the image.
Yeah.
There's your image. And so that was the goal for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, it all seems easy in retrospect. I mean, a lot of the stuff is like blowing my mind every step of the way, at the time.
Well, it's all easier said than done. Okay, I get the theory, but could I write the code? Not a fucking chance.
Well, now you could. Now you can actually follow like a course called Writing a Ray Tracer in a Weekend, and you will write a ray tracer in a weekend, and you'll understand every step. I swear to you, you would.
Yeah.
I mean, you might get annoyed by the programming language itself more than you will the math or the concepts.
Right.
But I swear to you, it's like it's so simple. It's all clouded in twisted thinking, and you're not mature enough with all the concepts to truly understand it.
Yeah.
But as things have moved on from there, like simple illumination calculations, then came what's called PBR, physically based rendering.
Yeah.
Which is a way of kind of characterizing the the reflectance response on the surface of objects. So you used to run these naive shaders that would say, like, you tell me how the light that fell onto me. Just give me the result color. You go figure out how I was lit. Give me the result color for that spot on the surface. Yeah. Now it's more abstract. Now you say, like, hey, I'm kind of my base color is this, but I'm partially reflective and I'm partially diffuse
characteristics.
So you give it the shape of your reflections. Your reflectance. So you're giving a proper probability distribution. And then some secondary process goes and throws light around the scene and solves all those light paths, hopefully in a clever, efficient way. Yeah. And then returns you the value. So we're kind of in this, Manuka is in this, it's kind of straddles both of these worlds where it does some of the stuff up front, it does some of the old school approach of breaking things down. It does a rasterization, but the illuminance computations are sophisticated and spectral, and we do this on purpose because people believe that doing this rasterization process is the most efficient way of alleviating some of the computations downstream. So you've broken the computation into two pieces. Now it's evenly balanced, and we can optimize those two problems individually and get a good result. That's kind of different to most modern renderers where they use kind of ray traced PBR from the get-go all the way throughout the pipeline, and just do the work as they need to do it during the rendering, during the light transport process. On the fly, and so you're doing the minimal amount of work, but it's also renders are tricky because it's not just the amount of work you do; it's how coherent that work is. Because CPU likes coherence in when it's fetching memory from the memory caches, it wants to go to the L0 and the L1 caches first. So if you have things that are kind of close together and you're running the same sort of a inner loop code paths, it's really fast. But if you're doing some rays and then this thing suddenly needs to go and fetch a big texture from memory and do some more work, you break coherence. You might do less work, theoretically. Yeah. But it's all incoherent and you double your render time. So, we get to keep coherent because we're doing kind of phases in a coherent fashion. Right. So one could argue that our renderer is just as fast, if not faster, than a lot of renderers.
I was going to ask you this about Right, about processing times, and is this whole spectral thing a big processing burden? Is it a big overhead? But you've kind of answered the question, right?
Yeah. In like amazingly, some of the early implementations of spectral rendering gave it a bad name with respect to performance, because there are ways of doing it. You can sample all the spectrum individually and whatever, but you can also kind of exploit some of the mechanisms. There's a thing called like wave striding, and you can RG and B can be 3 different wavelengths, and and then you start to maybe stochastically pick different wavelengths instead of striding through all of your bands. You might do that stochastically,
Right.
and so you end up with the same amount of sampling, but potentially more color noise in the result. Turns out that you have to sample 30% more, not 200% more, or it's just a little bit more than RGB rendering, and you can resolve that extra color noise that's introduced.
Color noise being a good thing. That's the quote unquote. That's the quote unquote reality that we want. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. It's an artifact of true simulation, right?
Right.
And you do things to kind of counter all that, and you do it's called firefly processing and whatnot. Because sometimes you'll get like a spike. You'll get like one of those samples will hit directly on the brightest light source, but none of its neighbors do, and then you'll end up with a bright pixel, bright green, or whatever it is,
dead pixel, yeah.
Bright ultraviolet.
Yeah.
But then you run filters to try and denoise that.
Yeah.
Do that wisely without introducing bias and all these good things that you have to do to kind of.
Okay, I know I'm way out of my depth, but just a bit of spitballing here. Why stop at what's coming in at the camera? Why not do some film emulation inside the camera using your spectral process? 3 chemically sensitive layers.
Chemical.
Yeah, you model the camera gate. You model the light going through the 3 layers, being absorbing, rebouncing, the light bouncing in and around the lens. Come on, just why stop there?
Hey, I've actually seen people doing that in little Blender tests of their own. Like they create like an elaborate full physical camera. They try and emulate all that stuff.
Cool.
It is quite amazing how far this guy went with all of those concepts. We go as far as just we emulate obviously all the film components like film speed and ISO and camera sensitivity. Our light sources themselves are never they're never like CG light sources, as in they're never like point lights. They're never like 0-dimensional.
0 dimension, yeah. They actually exist, yeah.
They exist. All of them are like spheres, like a Lambertian emitter, And this Lambertian emitter is like stuffed in a housing.
Right.
So our spotlights are not artificially gated by a fancy little fall-off code, little interpolator. Instead, we have physical
CG pieces of cardboard.
Physical CG gates holding that light in there. And the width of the bulb compared to the length of the blades will give you the softness of the fall off. The edges, the barn door edges. So you can kind of play with those things a little bit and get like sharper barn door edges, or you can pretend like there's a flag like close to the lens, close to the light source, so you'd end up with a big gradient, or you could kind of move it away and you'd get a sharper gradient. But it's all done. None of it's done analytically. It's all done with brute force.
Right.
And then we've made mistakes before where we accidentally lost, the shader, the surface shader that we apply to the barn doors is like a fully matte shader. Like light hits it, it's gone.
Gone.
But we've made mistakes before where we've accidentally lost that shader and we've had essentially just gray, like a gray box, and the light paths inside of the box were dragging down the performance of the renderer because it was
never stopping. Yeah.
Lights inside of the light housing.
Careful what you wish for.
Yeah. You can get a lot of bad behavior when you start doing things physically that way. A common thing in rendering is like, how do you render indirect light source through in another room, right? Like light bouncing around the corner.
Yeah.
Or how do you render like caustics, like a light path through water and towards the light source?
Or mist, or hazes.
Yeah, there's a notation for this, like light source through specular surface to a diffuse surface to camera. There's a little notation that you can kind of carry around. This is what a caustic is defined as.
Yeah.
Those can be obviously very expensive to find, because most of the time they're nowhere near. You can't make an educated guess on where that light source is and what's going to be in between you and that light source when there's refraction of that path involved.
Yeah.
And so that's when we also employ machine learning on the fly inside of the renderer. So the renderer goes like, it starts rendering and it has to start sending light paths in shitty directions.
Yeah.
And eventually it'll like hit the light source a few times and it goes, aha, it's in that direction, and it starts to bias its light paths towards that, and then continues to refine its learned knowledge of where the light source is throughout the render. You can kind of front load that if you want to and say like, do all your discovery ahead of time and then just blast through the render. Or you can say learn as you go.
Wow. I mean, doesn't that leave you with a situation where it's never twice the same? Presumably, you have to have a repeat.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, that's exactly what happens. That's exactly what. If you say learn all the way through, if you change something slight about it, like it's going to learn a different way the next time, obviously, because every light path is slightly different.
You just got to have the marketing team just has to brief the directors that's what we want. You're paying for that.
Yeah. I mean, that is implicit in the cost.
Yeah.
It's expensive, so it's going to take a long time too.
Okay. No, let's be serious for 1 second here. I've got the solution to all your problems. It's basically you just need one little routine, and it's basically the routine that says, if a tree falls in a forest and no one's watching, don't render it. And there you go. Just implement that everywhere.
Yeah. We don't do that.
Oh, okay.
In fact, it's called pre-shade before hit. I render this in two phases. The before light transport, we figure out what color the surfaces all are, but we also have to kind of know where they are in relative to the camera, so we have to know what detail to resolve them at. We haven't rendered them, but we're just saying like,
if it's far away, just low res. I don't need all the detail. Yeah.
Exactly, and we don't simplify. You go as low as the lowest model resolution you have, and that's. You still might get 1 million polygons in 10 pixels because we don't roughen it. We don't coarsen the geometry.
Right.
So that becomes really inefficient when you have like 1 million polygons in 10 pixels.
Yeah.
But the bigger it becomes, we can start to make educated guesses about how much to refine it. But we also have issues where we have like, well, there's somebody inside of that house that's on the cliff in the distance, and we can't really. It's behind a window, but is that window transparent? So we end up having to resolve it as if it's fully visible.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, it's not. And it won't know until you start throwing light samples around the place.
Right.
So. There's a lot of waste, and that's the challenge in our architecture is to minimize the amount of pre-computation waste goes on without knowing fully what the scene looks like. Other renderers don't have that problem, but then they have the coherence.
So super real, but yeah, you don't want to get stuck in these processing black holes. I mean, just for, okay, we're talking about the high end now, but just whenever it was, when Fight Club came out, I remember you explained to me all about photogrammetry. And I remember you explained like they were flying around places, like they would, while Tyler Durden was talking, they'd do little fly arounds to explain where the bomb was. And it just kind of, you explained it like, go to the 10th floor, take a photo, go to the 9th floor, take a photo, go to the 8th floor, take a photo, and then just, put those two together. You don't need to build any geometry, or you just wrap this as a texture onto a simple geometry, and you get a pretty good feeling of being there.
Yeah. That was a pretty revolutionary thing at the time. It was just taking like environment mapping to this new level, right? You just photograph everything, and you write some simple software to kind of stitch those images together in either like a long kind of environment, or you could get, as you said, on simplified facets, and you could patch them together, and it
just animation basically. Just yeah. Yeah, I mean, because from my perspective, I've got a very clear feeling of what is 2D and what is 3D. But I think from your vantage point, there's almost like there's no 2D, because everything can be wrapped on an object and relit.
Yeah, it's pretty plastic when it gets to us, right? We, even the compositing process has been largely 2D over the years. But like a decade ago, more like this notion of deep rendering appeared, and it's essentially, instead of storing just the pixel color value at a raster position, you're storing any information, like if it's got any transparency due to either being transparent or being motion blurred.
Right.
As soon as something becomes motion blurred, it's considered a volume. Because it's a time-aliased volume. It's a time extruded volume. It's a four-dimensional kind of a data set that you got in that snapshot, right? So you have to. So like even the simplest two-dimensional object will be extruded along that its motion path, and has multiple depth samples from point of view of the camera.
Right.
So that becomes what we call deep rendering. So we end up storing not just the color, but a function describing multiple samples. It's almost like voxels, but it's more like more of a sparse function along the camera array, so that you have an idea
in the direction of interest. Yeah.
You can now then take two objects that you've rendered in separate passes, completely separate renders, and you can cohabitate them. They won't interact with each other lighting-wise or shadows or anything. But if they're rendered in the same lighting environment, they usually look fine, and you can kind of push them through each other. You can cheat their depth, or even if they were traveling together, they will overlap and blend together in the compositing application.
Yeah.
Because now the compositing application has this notion of 2D, 3D, it's now now this deep data that it has to deal with. But that is coming more and more. That's more and more available even to the front ends of things now. Like you can generate voxels obviously in 3D, voxel clouds. You can rasterize them directly into new voxel clouds. You can rasterize them to 2D. You can rasterize them to deep data, which is, and it becomes pretty plastic, what you can do with some of that stuff. The tools are still kind of being written more every day as we speak.
Okay, well, two comments. The one comment is, when we did our unsuccessful animation series 30 years ago, I was the dude walking around construction sites taking photos of rusty metal. That was my contribution to the technical side of things. So yeah, a lot of this is way above my pay grade. But yeah, it's it's where we're slowly working there, but it's where I want to end up with our discussion is say this merger of traditional 2D film and interactivity. And I think Weta is really at the heart of that now, with this link to Unity and, Unreal Engine and all those things. So maybe, we're naturally working in that direction. I think that's really, really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I don't know if you heard much about these. You just made me think about. Have you heard about Gausian splatting?
Because that's what. Yes, and like AI is just another version of what you're talking. Like rip up and sample a whole bunch of images, then construct me an image of car from all these other. Ripped images of cars.
Yeah, but the data that's being produced, the Gaussian splat clouds, is essentially just a three-dimensional particle cloud where each particle is drawn as a fuzzy ellipsoid, right. And the ellipsoid's got some notion of incident lighting on it, so that when you kind of move it around, you'll get a view-dependent lighting lights on it. Like you can kind of move it around, you'll see a reflection move because it has a notion of being a reflective object. But that's yet another representation that breaks the barriers, or it's no longer a rigid 2D pixel raster.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a 3D volumetric. It's not a deep data that. Where the depth is along the camera rays,
mm-hmm.
The camera depth. Instead, you've got this unstructured three-dimensional point cloud that can also move around and recreate a very, very convincing interactive image,
And its input is photography of a real scene. Is that it? You just walk around in a scene and just take millions of photos?
It's kind of a rehash of an older idea, because Gaussian splats are kind of a particle rendering concept from, I think, the 90s. But it didn't really gain much traction. People are like, oh, that's cool, you can draw fuzzy ellipsoids. Then they blended it with AI doing a deconstruction of photographs, and being able to synthesize that Gaussian splat cloud with all these coefficients, spherical harmonic coefficients for the sake of lighting hints. So the AI part is, you can discard that in a sense. 3D rendering software like Manuka could generate Gaussian splats instead of rasters.
Right.
And then you're leaving some part of the light transport component, really. You've baked out the hard part, and now you've given it these spherical harmonic hints so that you can push it, you can tweak it further on demand. Right? So the client, your TV, you could tell it to shift the camera view a little bit, and you'll get a different view of the scene, And we know of people that are trying to make this a reality for like VR headsets or whatever, where you can get streamed content like us, this interview right here, and somebody will be able to look around you. It'll just be a live 3-dimensional hologram made out of flying points that are just splat drawn.
I seem to get just from the verbal description, I get the feeling that the images wouldn't be sharp. I don't know. It's just a naive view, but I guess it comes down to you can do totally crisp pixels. You describe them as fuzzy ellipsoids. I get this feeling that it's
one of the experimental data sets is a bicycle leaning against a bench in the outdoors. It's sharp enough for you to resolve the spokes on the bicycle.
Right.
So you can get really close to it, and you can break the illusion pretty quickly. You go, whoa, and you're like, okay, unless something's going to hallucinate extra data in the under resolved parts, which is going to come. That's happening. That is going to be the next step,
right,
for us. I think we'll see Gaussian splatting, upresing, hallucination AI next to try and fill in all the gaps so you can infinitely zoom into something in a plausible way, and it'll feel okay.
So in terms of like making films, you can choose. You're going to have to decide where you're going to put your computation expensive calculations, and are you still going to leave some room for client manipulation? Like, is it still partially 3D by the time I've given it to composite? Like even like one day prior to delivery of the DCP, you could still be doing some move that camera slightly left or right, or no, sorry, we've rendered it out and we need another week if you want to change the camera angle. That's one whole thing, production. But then you're talking also about on delivery, you can also have some interactivity and some immersion, which is a whole nother thing.
It's a whole nother thing. Yeah. I mean, you could be watching a movie and you might like the lighting in your room and you want that same lighting to be hinted into the imagery you're looking at.
Right.
And, you could, and I don't know, I'm just making it up, but because it is solving part of the lighting equation in a sense, on the fly, in the client software, in the TV set, in the VR headset,
right?
Then you can do quite a few things, right? You can do a bunch of dynamic operations on it.
Time of day. You're watching the movie in the morning, hence there's some lighting decisions that it's very suited to interactive games, not so suited to theatrical films, but
yeah, maybe not. Maybe I'm sure it'll edge its way in. Using I've seen people trying to do portraits of their family,
right?
And maybe a little portrait would be a Gausian splat thing that's kind of the head's moving around and animating a bit and responding to lighting in the room, and maybe even, if with enough AI, just look at the people in the room.
I think the funeral market would be, you'd never run out of customers, and secondly, wonderful.
It's like fucking ancestry.com.
Yeah, bring it on. Okay. Somebody patent that.
Yeah, it'll be a whole new level of creepiness.
Yeah, I mean, we already the things I had left were really about the R&D and how these companies have, just some examples like the water on Titanic or the time slice on the Matrix. And I mean, time slice on Matrix is a bad example because apparently someone had already come up with that, and then they used it in the Matrix, and that's what popularized it. Well, it didn't really. So the cart kind of came before the horse in that situation.
They took it to a new level.
Right. They made it sexy. Obviously, because you're faced inside of these companies, there's proprietary stuff that you still want to keep close to your chest. That's your competitive advantage in the market. But so it's more like a copycat process where things become commonplace based on Titanic or certain movies.
I think there's a few patterns involved. I think there are a lot of motivated people that are not developers or researchers that exist at these companies, and their first instinct, if the company spirit and the company is permitting this way, many will run very far with crazy ideas. Weta is probably its ace in the hole in a sense is that it never tries to restrict the output of an artist. For instance, on Gemini Man, they simulated Will Smith down to the micropore level. You could zoom straight all the way in. You could do tetrahedral simulations on the pore level, and all the micro fissures and cracks between the pores are emulated. The amount of data that this artist produced just because of these decisions he'd made was astronomical. The amount of compute he put that show under. That show was already under massive compute because it was a 4K 120 hertz
Oh, 120 FPS.
Sorry.
Wow, crazy. Yeah.
And stereo. So it was like
Jesus.
it was intense. It was like, and then this guy went all the way and did poor level simulations of Will Smith. But it starts there, right? It usually starts with some guy that has the time and the guts and the balls to do these crazy things. And then the developers are like, "Oh, dang, we want to do that, do we? All right, then we're going to have to harden our simulators and our geometry representation pipeline, or whatever it is, to kind of enable those kinds of things." There's obviously the track, the pure research track. We have dozens of pure researchers at Weta, which is kind of unusual for a lot of these companies. They have people that just work on research topics, and it's not really their responsibility to see how those things drop into production. The good ones always have this in their mind. The responsible ones, the ones that have grown up in this market, have this in the back of their mind. We get people straight from university that are like blue sky thinkers. And it might be impractical, but they'll just go and do something. And so that's the other avenue that we get development dropped into our laps.
No, I'm picturing people taking like hand grenades and putting them in like a cubic meter of jelly and setting them off and see what happens. Like just or like pouring glasses of water and watching the sun like stream through them again and again and again. Just I'm observing. I'm
Yeah, it feels a little bit like the heyday of that stuff is almost past, right? We've got so much knowledge now, that we see come out in SIGGRAPH. We see, I can drop a CG box on the table and it'll simulate the exact noise it'll make.
Right. Wow.
And I'll tell it what it's made of, and it'll figure out the reverberations. Even that comes out of CG, out of these kind of visual effects topics, or at least CG industry, because they want to emulate everything. They want to do everything. So some of the like the early days, there was like people wondering why the specular highlight on the water looks the way it looks. And then trying to emulate it with multiple lobes of reflection or whatever, doing whatever they need to do, right? And then some research drops, 5 years later, and it's implemented the right way. So we're in an industry that kind of rolls forward like this. We have the keener TDs, we call them, like the TDs that more people that want to push the envelope mostly. The TDs create the first iteration of the emulation of whatever effect they want to create. Then the industry takes like 5 years to chew on it, and then some research gets dropped about it, and then eventually the vendors pick it up and implement it, and then
optimize and all those good things.
Passed, and now there's a formal implementation of the thing that some guy did in 2004. One of my favorite things lately is like I remember doing heat haze through fire, right? We did a fire simulation. Usually you can just get away with kind of cheapo heat haze where you're just kind of having a noise and you're just wiggling the background. Mm-hmm. Appropriate looking tempo, But I had reason on, I think it was the movie called Cabin in the Woods, like there was a ghostly thing. I actually did curved refraction through the volume because I wanted to get like some ghostly look to the Spectre character that had like a heat haze type of effect around it. And I was like, yeah, okay, that looked pretty good. And I did this all in a little shader, inside of Mantra one. And looked pretty good. I realized that could be used obviously for fire, for true blue heat haze. But I didn't really have the mathematical diligence, I kind of thumbsucked the implementation, I was like, well, the temperature field gradient is like this, and it kind of seems this intense, so I'll kind of bend the ray towards this by this amount.
Right.
I didn't implement, Snell's law or Hamiltonian optical momentum or anything. I didn't do any of this.
Wow, okay.
I didn't, But now, the year before last in SIGGRAPH, a formal proposal was introduced by a company, Animal Logic, on how to do it the right way. And when it's used to render fire, it looks amazing. It looks, not only is the background warped, but the interior details, the light ray the camera ray gets refracted before it even hits fire. So you get an added shredding of the, dancing of the fire from the heat haze before it even hits the fire.
Wow.
The soot in the fire that actually gives you that color. That's how long it took, right? It took like a decade. A decade before I did it. And now, nobody obviously knew that I did it, but I did it. And now you see it. Now you see a formal implementation. And you're like, wow, that's about as long as it takes.
Right. Oh, that's interesting.
I think many people have done this before, I think. It was my personal realization of my development.
Maybe the last topic we touch on is just this confluence of games and maybe how has the culture maybe changed at Weta since the purchase by Unity, and where is there kind of a clear idea of where it's heading?
The deal was made with Unity where all the developers, the entire tech division was sold to Unity. All the tech went with it, all the licensing. They own every line of code. And that actually lasted for about 2 years, but then collapsed. The Unity stock collapsed, and they decided that they were going to shut down what's called the Weta Tools project. And then they released all the stuff that they had just absorbed. So 99% of us went back to Weta. So now we're back working for Weta. But Unity remains the owners of the code. We have rights to that code in perpetuity. So we still actively develop on all the stuff all the time. But the larger question about what was the plan for merging with games or to exploit game engines and all that kind of thing. In the Unity context, there wasn't a huge amount planned in that regard. There was a large amount of speculation, but we didn't get to start on any of it because we were so busy with Avatar 2 responsibilities. They remained our top priority, the Avatar 2 clients. So we ended up not exploiting our relationship with Unity. But we have a good relationship with the Unreal guys, Epic.
Yeah.
We have a division, special projects division, that do a lot of work using Unreal Engine. They love it. It's promising to the point that there are people that are trying to are proposing that we use it in production, in film production in coming years. But we're just taking it. We're taking it eagerly but slowly, I think.
Right, and this is presumably more than just the background of a VR production. You're talking more than that. You're talking maybe a live renderer
about final
or something.
Image rendering. Yeah, final
Right.
final image delivery rendered, just static renders out by Unity.
Yeah, because I mean, my feel about it is that what film has to offer is, look and style and story and drama and atmosphere. And what games have to offer is interactivity, immersion, all this kind of, a nonlinear story structure, a community. You can play the story, choose your own adventure kind of thing. So the merging of those is fairly fascinating. And I think, maybe you've got a deeper insight as to what those two worlds can contribute to each other.
Yeah, I think, I used to think that there would be a more accelerated timeline involved where we'd have more crossover kind of content. But I haven't really seen that too much, to be honest. It seems like these things are on very different tracks still. They obviously can feed each other more faithfully now with digital resources, assets, and whatnot. The diligence of game production has stepped up. As their processors and their video cards and whatnot have gotten more powerful, they are allowed to produce high resolution assets. Dare I say, film resolution assets.
Right.
I think we're still a step above them for the most part. But they've kind of they are very asset centric as well, especially for their primary assets. So they will generally overmodel for the sake of the asset development, and then they can kind of down-res from there.
Yeah, simplify for render. Yeah.
Yeah. And AI is kind of playing a part in both of these. There's lots of effort, I noticed at SIGGRAPH this year, to make AI-driven surface appearance modeling. So, you can train an AI on what an object looks like, and it'll try and produce you a coherent surface model that just emulates that. And we're at the early days of that. We can do some of that. I think there's technology to do that, but to make it kind of controllable and artistically influenceable and performant, all these things are still on the table. But I see games taking vast advantage of AI in coming years. That they might actually lead the charge on a lot of that stuff, and we will probably be able to take advantage of that. There'll probably be, the tables will be turned a little bit. It always used to be, feature film, feature VFX would always lead in complexity because we had obviously the time budgets to do it and the
budgets to do it. Yeah.
The budgets and the memory budget, all the budgets, I guess.
Yeah.
We obviously have very particular creative direction, whereas games have way less. They don't have this notion of shots, so we have to reapply some thinking on every single shot that we produce. Because every single shot is tailor made without a pixel out of place. Games are obviously way different.
Yeah, I would guess games have a lot more user feedback in the development process than a film would. Obviously, people do test audiences for films, but I'm sure games, they're just like, okay, getting some teenagers in a room and let them play for an hour and like, oh, we're redesigning everything kind of thing.
Games are strategically developed. You can map where the hot zones are, for attention, and you can be very, very forgiving on many things because, you don't get time to look at it. There's no narrative element. Like a slow moving camera in a game is boring.
Yeah.
You're going to be sprinting past, burning building. You don't, it's pretty forgiving.
Right.
For us, not only do we have directors that really want to art direct every component of it, well, they will do it to a fault. They'll do it in areas that are not being looked at.
Right.
But they do this because it's, I guess it's just diligence.
Perfecting the world. Yeah. It's got to be all in the right tone and in the right key and everything.
Exactly. So we still lead on the quality side of things, but I think that we'll start to receive tools for it, like for creating more efficient assets and start to change us from within.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a gross oversimplification, but it's coming like what I deal with is this film has 4 delivery versions, SDR, HDR, or Dolby Vision cinema and normal cinema. And it's kind of almost like, okay, and there's the game delivery as well. So obviously that's a big leap, but yeah, okay, the interactive delivery. But what you're saying about feeding assets across is already a step there.
Yeah, I mean, you probably are aware that Unreal Engine, they have obviously the live stage virtual set functionality, where they can create LED walls.
Yeah, I'm quite exposed to that here. People are all chasing that as the new wow.
Yeah, and so are we. We have our own stack for a lot of that, but called Atlas and Friends. But that's obviously a very shiny bauble, and we're doing things in that space as well. Epic, more than Unity, made a concerted effort to kind of shake hands with the visual effects world. They introduced like OpenColor, so to that pipeline, so they would get faithful color reproduction, so that we could have, images float between these pipelines and actually not pop,
Right.
So that was a purposeful decision on their part. They made like a non-linear editor inside of Unreal Engine. I forget the name of it, but and like rendering components, and all tries to emulate proper color pipeline. So no more hackery.
So yeah, there's a creative layer that's over and above the the improving quality of lights and caustics and all these things which make games more and more like films. There's also this showlight which is film look or whatever suitable look.
Exactly. Tone mapping.
Exactly. Map those tones. Jay, I have used a lot of your very valuable time, and it's been an excellent chat.
Yeah, it's been great talking. I love it.
Yeah, no, this has been an eye opener for me. I've learned a lot just sitting here and listening to you.
Oh, thanks.
Cool. Well, let's do it again. I'm pretty sure that you've told a lot of secrets now that are going to get you into a lot of trouble.
A lot of the info about Manuka, it's out there.
Yeah. Cool.
But,
thanks so much for sharing, man. Thanks again for listening to the Color Mentor podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can leave comments on Patreon or Instagram. The Instagram handle is color.mentor. And remember to head over to the Color Mentor page on patreon.com and check out the goodies there. We'll see you next time.